Hey, how's it going, all you web developers out there? In today's video, you're going to learn how to create your very own Node.js server. Now, this is actually a follow-up video to my previous video where I showed you how to install and run Node.js on Windows and Mac. So if you missed that, or if you don't have Node.js installed, then please first of all check out that video and then come back to this one. Okay, so if you have Node.js installed and you know how to use it, then let's move on and create our very first Node.js server. Okay, it's a very short project overview. I'm going to do a quick introduction to Node.js. Then we're going to create our Node.js file. Now we're going to set up our project. We're going to go through what Node.js is. We're going to then create our port and our host name. Then we're going to set up our server. Then we're going to check our server. We're going to watch our server, watching the port actually, and then we're going to make some requests to the server. And at the end of the video, I'm going to refactor everything into a much simpler code. So with this being said, let's jump into Visual Studio Code and let's just start by creating a server.js file. Now, before we do anything within our project, let's just talk really quickly about Node.js. Now, as you may or may not know, Node.js is actually a way of running your JavaScript outside the browser. So instead of running JavaScript in the browser via the V8 engine, we're going to run JavaScript in Node.js using Visual Studio Code's console. So in order to start a console, we just go to, if you're on a Mac, then it's actually a terminal. If you're on Windows, then it's a console. So just start your console or your terminal and let's actually get started. So I don't need you. I just need one of them. Okay, our very first step will be to require the HTTP protocol. Now, HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it's actually a library which is used for fetching resources such as HTML documents. So let's just create a variable const, and we're going to call this HTTP, and we're going to assign it to the HTTP protocol by requiring it. So require, and we're going to require our HTTP protocol. Okay, so let's hit save. Next up, we're going to set up a port and a host name. Now, the port is required for the server to watch. So let's just create another const. Let's call it port, and we're going to assign it a number. Now, if you are using live server in Visual Studio Code, you usually run it on 5000. If you're using React, it's usually running on 3000, so I'm going to create a 2080, so 2080. Okay, and also I'm going to create a host name, and I'm going to assign this to a simple IP address. Normally this is a local IP address, so it's 127.0.0.1. I'm going to see later on why I'm doing this. Okay, so we have our port, we have our host. Next up, let's create the server itself. Now we can actually create a server by assigning to the HTTP protocol the create server function. Let's first of all create a const. Let's call it server. And we're going to assign, as I said, to the HTTP protocol, we're going to assign a create server function. Now this function is going to take in a callback function. So I'm going to use the keyword function again. And within here, we're going to have two arguments. And these two arguments will be actually a request and a response parameter. So there are two parameters actually. So request, comma, response, res. So this will be the function that is going to run in the server. So now that you have your server function, the next step will be to assign the server to a port to listen to, in which case we're going to use the port that we just created previously. So we're going to call upon the server. I'm going to say, hey server, listen, and it's going to listen to the port, and it also takes in a second parameter. Now this second parameter will actually be a error handler. So no error. So if we have an error, this is actually again a callback function. Going to use function, and if we do have an error, so we're going to use an if statement. So if an error exists, then we're going to console log that error, and I'm going to use backticks here, I'm going to say you have a error, and then we're also going to console log the actual error. So I'm going to use here interpolation and say use the error that was thrown. Error. But if we don't have any error, so else, we're going to console log the port, and we're going to console log, let's say a text of server is running on HTTP // and we're going to use the host name, so interpolation host name. So it's basically this host name that we created here, and this host is running on the port. So port. Okay. So now that we have a server function and we're listening to a port, we could actually run our server. So let's run our server. Now we're just going to do a test run because we don't have any responses, requests, or responses within it. But I just want to show you how the server actually works. Now for this, we need to go into the console and just tell it that node, we're going to run node, and node will run this file right here, so server.js. And if we hit enter, they're going to, because we don't have any kind of error, then it's going to tell us that the server is now running on the port, on the IP address with this port. Now there's two ways of accessing this. Either you open up your browser, whichever browser you're using. I'm using Google Chrome, so let's just drag it here. Let's say localhost and 2080, and if I hit enter, well, nothing's happening because there's nothing to be displayed. But we do know that our server is running. So we can access this also by holding down Control on a PC or Command on a Mac and clicking on it. And it's basically do the same thing. It's going to open up the server, this port with this IP address. Okay, now let's stop the server. The way we stop a server is, this is both on PC and Mac the same. You hold down Control and then C, and this stops Node server. Now let's go back into our server function. And within here, let's actually start displaying something. Let's tell the user something. So we're going to use the server function in order to run some kind of response, which is going to be displayed to the user. For this, we can use response. So this response right here, res, with its write method. So we're going to type in write. And now within here, within parentheses, we can write anything that we want to our users. So let's say, hello user from the server. Boom. Let's hit save. Now the server is running and writing until we stop it. And in order to stop it, we're just going to use the res.end command or method. Okay, and this is basically going to stop the server. So let's run a server again. Let's say node server.js, hit enter. I'm going to use command and click on the IP address, and there you go. Let me actually make this larger. Hello user from the server. That's pretty cool. It means that the server is now running. And we actually displayed something to the user. Okay, but this is just plain text, and we actually want to run HTML or render HTML files. So I'm going to comment this out and go underneath it. And now comes the next step. We're going to now render a HTML file in the browser throughout the server. And for this, we need to create, first of all, an index, a HTML file. So let's just create a index.html file, a pretty generic one. Now there is a short command key of shift exclamation mark is going to give you a boilerplate, and within here I'm going to create an h1. Let's say this is your web page. Okay, let's hit enter. Let's hit save. Now let's go back to our JavaScript file. And in order to render an HTML file, we first need to call the write method, the write head method. So let's say res.writeHead, this is also a method. This also needs two things. It first of all needs a status code. For example, you most certainly saw the 404 status code, which means not found. But we're not going to use a 404 status code because that is something bad. We're going to, or that something went wrong. We're going to use a status code that is going to display everything as okay, which is actually 200. This means that everything was written and all the information is okay. We can display the information to the user. Now, after that, you need to set the content type, which is a key value pair. So we actually need to tell the server what kind of content we're requesting. So let's open and close curly braces. And within here, within string, we're going to tell that the content dash type, as a capital T, type column is going to be, again, a string of text / and HTML. So this is the type of content that we're going to request. Okay, so let's hit save. So in order for our server to read this kind of content, we now need to import another type of library. And this is the file service library. So let's create a const. Let's call it fs, and we're going to require again the fs library. That's all you need to do. Now we're going to grab onto the fs library, and we're going to use the read file method on it. Now this method is used to read the files from your computer. So let's open and close parentheses, and within here we're going to tell it first of all which file to read. We want it to read our index.html file, and then we're going to need another callback function which is going to take in an error. We're going to check first of all for error, and then if there is no error, then it's going to display a data. So let's also take the condition of if there is an error, then please display me that error. So res, the response itself is going to be an error. I'm going to write to the head a response of 404. So problem, so that we have a problem, file not found. Okay, and let's also res.write, let's say error, file not found. But if we don't have any kind of error, then else we're going to response, and we're going to write the data to the browser. Okay, so if there is no error, we're going to respond with the data that is fetched using the read file, and it's going to fetch us this index.html file. Now we're still not done yet because we need to close our response exactly as we did up here, and tell it response.end, and we're going to close it. And I have an error because you should be up here. Okay, so let's try this again. We're going to close up our server. We're going to type in node server.js, hit enter, open up the file, and hey, there we go. This is your web page. Okay, so now our server is running. We can actually change something up here. Let's say h2, change, hit save, go back to our file, refresh, and you can see the server is running. Okay, now let's simplify this code a bit. I'm actually going to comment out everything until the const server. And let's type in here comment of refactor. So we have our HTTP constant up here. Let's take this HTTP, let's say .create server. Now let's use a callback function, but this time I'm going to use an arrow function. So I'm going to go in here, use an arrow function, and it's going to take in the request and the response. Now because it's only going to take in one single line of code, not one single line of code, but one single line of response, I'm going to say fs.readFile, And it's basically exactly what we had up there. It's going to read the index.html, and we're going to use another callback function here. It's going to have an error and the data. Okay. And this is going to now return the response of right head. And exactly as we did up there, we're going to have a response of 200, the status code, and then the content type. So we need a key value pair of content type, which is going to be the type of text / HTML file. And if the response is okay, then we're going to write the data that we're receiving, and we're going to end the response. Okay, now for the port, I'm just going to go down. For the port that we're listening to, I'm going to go down here. I'm going to type in listen to the port. I didn't close up or end. Missing a dot there. Node server.js. And now our server should be up and running on localhost 280. We refresh the page. There we go. There's our web page again. Okay, so this is the shorter version of everything that we did from here up to here. Okay, everyone, so that's it for this project. If you liked the video, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, hit the thumbs down. If you have any kind of questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below. Also, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell because we post new videos like this all the time. Also, as I said, check out the previous video on how to install and run Node.js on Windows and Mac. And catch you next time. Bye-bye.